Go in one. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Hello, good evening. Can I please request everyone to keep their
Good
speakers?
evening. Good evening.
Yeah, welcome to the third session and the final session in this series. I hope that most of you have been a part of the previous two sessions, so you know which series I'm talking about. We'll just wait for a couple of seconds more so that everybody joins in, connects to their audio, and then we'll start. I can see a lot of familiar names. Welcome back to everyone who has been with us for the previous sessions of the series. All right, I think almost everyone joined in. Welcome everyone to the third session of the CSE Gen special series, The Educator's Guide to Environmental Studies. This is the third session in the series, the final session. We've done two sessions before this. And my name is Sakshi. I'm a part of the Environment Education Unit at CSE. And I'll tell you what GEN is if you are new to the network in a while. And first of all, let me tell you about this series that I've mentioned so many times by now. It was a 3-session series, and we have discussed themes from the latest UGC framework. So last year, UGC had released an updated curriculum framework for environmental studies for undergraduate programs all across the country. And we chose 3 themes from that syllabus, and we have done sessions on all of those. The basic aim of the series was to address the gap in translating knowledge into classroom teaching strategies, and particularly in the case of environment education. So for the first session, we took up the theme of climate change, and the series was titled Teaching Climate Resilience, where we talked about climate action and how we as educators can foster a deeper understanding of it amongst the students. In the second session, which was held last month, we called it Building Sustainable Campuses. And we talked about the idea, the concept of a green campus, and the possible case studies and field work that you could use in your classrooms to teach your students about what a green campus is. All these 2 sessions have been recorded. The recording is available on our YouTube page, so you can refer to that in case you missed these sessions. And today we have the third session in the series, which we are calling SDGs, a teaching guide. So we'll talk about SDGs, we'll talk about how you can integrate them into your curriculum and how they can be used as an overarching framework to tie in all the themes of this latest UGC curriculum. I hope by the end of this session, you will feel inspired and equipped with new ideas and tools, and you'll be able to incorporate this theme into your teaching practices. Just a reminder, we have mentioned earlier, we'll give out participation certificates to everyone who has attended all 3 sessions. We'll be sending out an attendance form at the end of the session. Please ensure that you fill out that form so that we know that you have attended all the sessions and we can send you your participation certificate. Now, if you have not yet registered for the GEN network, we would request you to do that as well before you send in your form for the participation certificate. Now, many of you are already GEN members, but those of you who are joining us for the first time, what we are calling GEN is the Green Educators Network, which is a community of college educators. So this network is open only for college educators, and it's a community of educators who are teaching environment related courses in different universities throughout the country. And All Gen members work actively towards nurturing the skills, knowledge, attitudes in young students so that they can contribute to sustainable and equitable development. We have a variety of events for our network members, as you may have seen in the emails that we have sent you. So you will be eligible to participate in all these events once you register for the network. Uh, Please do note that this network is open only for college educators as of now. If you are a school educator, please write to us. We'll mention the email ID in the chat box later on, and we can direct you towards our very vibrant school network as well. So now, without further ado, let's begin with the session. But before we do that, let us quickly gauge the feel of the audience today, how familiar you are with SDGs, and have you been integrating it into your classrooms or not. So let me quickly launch a poll. It is a multiple choice poll, and please respond to it so that we know whether you are familiar with SDGs in your classroom, or whether it's the first time that you are being introduced to this theme as a classroom edition. So yeah, there should be a poll, multiple choice poll on your screens right now. Please respond to it. The question is basically how familiar you are with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. That will also help us to understand how much of depth should we go into in these sessions. Right. I think most of you have responded to the poll, and I can see that most of you are saying, almost 50% are saying that they are very well versed with the Sustainable Development Goals. That's very good to hear. Most of you are at least somewhat familiar. So, okay. I'm ending the poll now. Right. So, these Sustainable Development Goals are a set of 17 global objectives adopted by UN member states in 2015 as a part of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. These were designed to address a wide range of issues, including poverty, inequality, climate change, environmental degradation, peace, justice, and as it is evident, they're all interlinked. So they represent a universal call to action to end poverty, to protect the planet, to ensure that all people enjoy peace and prosperity. Very tall claims, but as educators, you are in a unique position. Why? Because you can take these goals to your classroom. You can make these goals not sound like tall claims, but something that can be implemented in real life by students. But the question is, how can we do this? How can we bring SDGs to our classrooms? So to answer that question throughout this session, we have with us CSE expert Rajit Sengupta. Welcome, Rajit.
Thank you.
He has delved extensively into SDGs, how India is faring on these goals. And using his insights, he will discuss what are the major challenges to the achievement of SDGs and how can you as educators bring these global goals into your classrooms. Rajit is a climate journalist and media trainer with over 13 years of experience with several English media organizations. He's currently the associate editor with DTE, the Down to Earth magazine, and he manages the Climate Data Center. He's also the co-author of The State of India's Environment in Figures. We launched this publication recently. It's the only data-driven annual book on climate in India. And he also writes a column called Bite Size. So we're really looking forward to the session, Rajit. So without delay, over to you.
Thanks a lot.
I'll just
Please.
share the screen.
Just closer to me. Thanks a lot. I'll just, yeah, now it feels good. First of all, thanks a lot for joining in on a work day. I know you guys would have already spent much of your energy teaching kids. And now that you've taken out time, I can promise you that for the next 1 hour, I'll ensure that you'll take back at least something that is exciting or something that is new. So the topic for today is SDGs, a teaching guide. So I'll quickly tell you what is the structure that I'm following so that we know when I graduate through the different slides, what we are looking at. So the first part, we'll be talking about resources. In resources, what I want you to focus is not exclusively on the numbers that I'm talking about, but also the sources that I'm mentioning. So I have picked up relevant portions for the PPT, but these sources have a lot of background information that you can inculcate in your day-to-day teaching in your classrooms. So within the resources, we talk about very briefly now because of the poll. I realize that most of us already are aware of what SDGs are. So we'll look at what the goals are. Very briefly, we'll talk about that. We'll also look at where the world stands today. So basically, 2030 is the deadline. We are sitting in 2024. So roughly 6 years is what the world has to achieve SDGs. So this is somewhat a midway. So we'll see what the world has achieved so far. We will also look at what all remains to be done, which are the SDGs where we are lagging, which are the SDGs where we made reasonably good progress, and which are the SDGs that were affected by the pandemic very, very badly. Then we'll also talk about the challenges that we're facing. And within the resources, we'll also look at where India stands in its SDG goals. So all the countries across the world, as most of you would already know, have to achieve the SDGs. So there are 198, if I'm not wrong, 198 UN signatories, and they are all countries and they are all achieving or gearing up to achieve the SDGs. The second part after that would be purely on activities. These are some of the activities that we at CSE have tried to develop that you can literally take it back to your own classrooms and you can work with them with your own students. So these are specific activities that we'll be looking at and we'll be interested in. So before we do that, let me just jump through and let me just look at the first activity that we'll be doing and how we all fare. So we'll try to do it over here live right now. So what I've done is I have taken today's Hindustan Times. So I'm based out of Delhi. So I've taken today's Hindustan Times Delhi. And what I've tried to do is look at what are the pressing news or pressing things that were there today. And I would request all of you to type it out. So this is the front page of Hindustan Times. There was an ad underneath it. So I've chopped it out. And if you can identify what are the SDGs that are affected. So the lead headline is basically how Delhi has received within the first 8 months, its annual rainfall. Yesterday, it rained really badly in Delhi. So that is the first SDG. If you can just type out what SDG this is according to you, or which SDG would look at this. So if you could just type it out, then we'll move on to the next. Right now, we're just looking at the Delhi story that is there. A lot of rainfall that has happened over here. Okay, I can see Pratik has written life on Earth. That's nice. Any other inputs in terms of which SDG we are talking about? Climate change. Climate change, okay. So technically, we don't have a climate change SDG. We have climate action SDG. That's SDG 13. Any other responses? What SDG this is? Earth, life on Earth. Okay. SDG 11, sustainable cities and communities. That's a very nice one. Okay, Rajesh has a very interesting take. It is also to do with poverty. Okay, so if we really extend it a lot, we can obviously include that the worst affected are the poor people. So obviously we can talk about that as well. Cloudburst, okay. Cloudburst is not an SDG. So can we try to write the SDG number or whatever the SDG means? So this is an activity you can do straight in your classroom as well. You can just take out the newspaper and you can talk about it. Life on land, life on earth. So life on earth is the one. Sustainable cities, sums filled. Perfect, perfect, perfect. Perfect. Let's stop over here. In my understanding, I thought the answers were SDG 13, climate action. I also thought that it is SDG 15, life on earth. And as rightly pointed out, it is also SDG 12 and in SDG 11, which is basically sustainable cities and communities. Let's move on to the next article that we have. Let's go to our right. extreme right. So the headline reads, 3 gun battles on a single day in pole-bound Jammu and Kashmir. So we're talking about violence over here. We're talking about crisis. We're talking about people losing life because of gun violence. Can we try to identify which SDG this will fall under? Dr. Aparna Thakur says peace. Yep, peace is an SDG, SDG 16, which talks about peace, justice, and strong institutions. So SDG 16 is what we are talking about. Any other SDGs that you possibly think is related to this? Safety and peace, that's the same thing, SDG 16. Second last, I really like this way. Yep, Ilias Mondal, that's a nice way of putting it. And second last SDG, that is SDG 16. Fair enough. SDG 3. SDG 3 is good health and well-being. Okay, that might. I am not very sure if I would club it over there, but it could be as well. SDG 16, perfect. Hunger, interesting. Perfect. Let's move on to the next one. In my head, the direct correlation is obviously SDG 16, where we're talking about peace and we're talking about strong institutions of justice and within communities. An extension, like Dr. Aparna and somebody else also pointed out, could be that the violence is because of inequity. So that might be triggering it. So then other SDGs can also come in. So if you look at it, this is something with the newspaper or the news is a wonderful way of starting a conversation in the classroom. And you can look at different layers within it. Let's move on to the one that is underneath this news article. Audio of call to parents shows hospital spoke of suicide death. We're talking about the Kolkata rape case that is in news right now. Which SDG does this fall under? We're talking about Kolkata rape case that is happening right now. This is an update on that. Do you think it falls under any SDGs? Okay. Reduce inequalities. Abdul, reduced inequalities would be slightly stretched. Reducing inequalities is predominantly about inequalities between the rich and the poor, and within countries that are rich and poor, and also within it, within a country, the rich and the poor shift is what we were talking about. We've got SDG 2, that is zero hunger. SDG 8, decent work and economic growth. That's interesting. I did not think about it. SDG 8 can actually be a part of this, which talks about decent work and economic growth. SDG 5 is the most obvious answer, which talks about gender equality. So this is a classic example of SDG 5, gender equality. And this is also one of the SDGs where globally all countries are struggling, even the developed countries are struggling. SDG 16, justice. Okay, fair enough. Let's move on to the small snippety. I don't know whether you guys can read it. Is it visible? The small stories that are there in the middle, in the gutter. So the first one talks about Assam Assembly clears bill to repeal Muslim marriage law. So basically in Assam, they're repealing the Muslim marriage law. Which SDG do you think it falls under? Muslim marriage law is being repealed in Assam. That's what they're discussing right now in Assam. In my head, that is also under gender equality. That is SDG 6, but there might be other extensions of that as well. SDG 18, SDG 18. We don't have an SDG 18. Interesting. Okay. Gender. SDG 10. SDG 10 is reduced inequalities. Okay, maybe. Okay. SDG 17 is partnership for the goals. I don't know how we will get it. Okay. Partnership for the goals. SDG 17 predominantly deals with how countries and also institutions within an individual country, how they all come together to achieve all the SDGs in a uniform way. So SDG 17 would not directly or be related to this. Fair enough. I think reduce inequalities or reduce gender equality is basically what we're looking at. Gender equality is the one that should be taken up over here. Let's move to the one that is underneath it with Rajnath Singh's photograph. The headline reads, Boost for Navy as INS Airghat is commissioned. So India's Navy is being strengthened. Can we talk about that for a brief second? Boost for Navy as INS, some ship has been commissioned for Indian Navy. Any ideas on this? SDG 12. SDG 12 talks about responsible consumption and production. I don't know how we will pull it that much, but then SDG 9 talks about industry, innovation, and infrastructure. I also don't know. So we are talking about how Indian Army or Indian Navy is getting a new ship and how it will strengthen our defenses. Peace is definitely something that we can look at. Peace is again SDG 16. Maybe SDG 8. SDG 8 talks of decent work and economic growth. Maybe. If they are able to hire more people, maybe. Life, I'm assuming this is life underwater, which is basically below water. That is SDG 14. Yep, SDG 14. Uh, could be if we really pull it and we are able to establish that these activities has an impact on our oceans and on the aquatic life that exists over there. It definitely could be a part of it. Fair enough. I'll just stop this one over here. And before we stop, this is something that I and at CSC we strongly believe can be done. So one is the fact that we can have we can track this newspaper clippings on a monthly basis. So what it'll do is, on the one hand, kids will get to know what is happening in news, and on the other hand, they'll be able to relate it to the SDGs that are associated with it, and you can have a healthy discussion around it. Another variation of this could also be that you look at international newspapers along with Indian newspapers. So you're getting basically a different perspective of what is happening in the world around us. And in that, you can have different gradations, like you can pick up an African newspaper, you can pick up a US newspaper or a UK newspaper, and you'll be surprised to see that all the headlines are in one way or the other related to an SDG that we're talking about. So this can be a clear-cut activity that you can do in your classroom. Now, what I'll do is I'll pause over here and I'll go to the top of my PPT, which will take a while for me because there are a lot of slides. And then we'll start from there on. So now we are back from the activity level to the resources level. I'll repeat what I said earlier. In the resources, I want you to focus not only on the bit of what I'm talking and what is written in the slides, but also at the resources or the sources that are given at the bottom, because there are a lot of information that is available that can provide you the backgrounder or the understanding of what these SDGs are, and you can take it up from there. Second. One second, I'll just jump up and I'll start fresh. Yep. So what are the SDGs? So we have a broad idea what these SDGs are. The way I look at it is, so when I had read SDGs for the first time, when it was being drafted at the point in time, was that I thought of all the things that I want in the world around me to change. And I could see an imprint of that in one of the SDGs. I want gender equality. Yes, I do. I could say that there's an SDG around it. I want there should not be any poor. I want there shouldn't be any hunger. So all these lofty ideas or the things that we want to change in the world around us, they are embedded in the SDGs. So that is the way I look at SDGs. And that is exactly the aim with SDGs was created in the first place. So the idea is that if all the countries across the world aim for the same goals of equity, be it social, be it economic, be it in terms of climate change, in terms of security, then the world as a whole would be a better place to live in. So this started in 2015, and the logo or the one-liner that they went ahead with was "No one is left behind." So when they say no one is left behind, it works at two levels. No one in the sense no human being is left behind. It also at the same time also talks about the fact that both the developed and the developing and also the poor countries, they all should progress equitably in this. And that is the reason why we have an SDG 17, which talks about partnerships, where basically one of the SDGs talks about how we can embrace renewable energy and green technologies. So developed countries have already the money and also the technology, so they should share it with the developing countries so that there is an equitable and a just growth that happens over there as well. So it is basically a blueprint to a just world. And then it also, the concept of sustainable development, very simply put, is basically that we take enough from the world today, that there is enough left for our future generations. So we should not become greedy. And that applies to individuals like Rajit and all of you. That also applies to the countries on a whole, the way we are developing. And that is basically where the problem starts. And that is basically why SDGs were brought in the first go. So we have enough to have a happy life right now, in a way, even though it is highly inequitable, but the world already has all the resources that it requires. But how do we ensure that this kind of a lifestyle, in the sense we have improved uh, age, we live longer nowadays, we have better health infrastructure, we have a lot of other things that are much better than what it was, let's say, before the industrial revolution started 100, 120, 30 years ago. The challenge that we are facing right now is how do we ensure there are enough natural resources and there is enough equity moving forward, and that the future generations can also live the ideal world that we are aspiring to live. There are obviously a lot of imperfections in that, but we are trying to improve upon it every day through the SDGs. So SDG is a call to action against socio-economical parameters, and it also is a call to action to address the environmental problem or the climate change problem that exists in the world today. So these are the 17 SDGs. I'll not spend too much time. We've talked about bulk of them while we were doing the activity. These are the 17 SDGs. So this year, UN, because UN is the nodal agency, UN came out with a report on the progress the world has made in SDGs. And what it found were these. It said that 34 of the SDG targets, so we're talking about the targets over here, for 34 of the SDGs, so there are 169 targets right now. So there are 17 global goals, SDG 17. They are what were decided at 2015, and they continue to be the same. However, these individual targets have been looked upon, so they've gone up, come down, depending on how. So they're trying to find the metrics to gauge whether the world is making progress in them. So right now, there are 169. I think a year and a half back, it was around 200, more than 200 indicators. Right now, we have got indicators of 169 targets underneath them. So now we're talking about like 6-7 years into it. So 2015 till about 2024. And we are midway through. Still, for 34 targets, the targets are within the SDGs. World does not have the data or is not sure about the metrics to calculate whether they are making progress or not. You have to understand the import of this. We don't even know how to measure whether we are progressing or not. That is the first logical step, and then we start to correct it. So for 34 targets, we don't know where it is, and this is the global figure that is there. Then we have seen that of the targets or the indicators that we have identified, in 48% of them, the progress is not as much as it is required. So if you look at the pie, the semicircle that we have on the right, the light yellow color and the light pink color, these are those indicators. We are not progressing at a rate that we should to achieve the SDGs. Then for another 18% of the targets, the world has in a way stagnated. And the stagnation started after the pandemic. And even now, the stagnation persists. So maybe we had made some progress, maybe we had not made any progress, but whatever it is, right now, the world is not progressing in them. One of them is, I know for a fact it is, so quality education is something that world over countries are struggling. So the entire infrastructure of the way education was being important, that got disrupted during the pandemic. And after that, getting new kids who were born in the pandemic years, back to the grind is a big problem. They are facing mental problems, they're facing social problems, they're facing learning problems. I'm confident many of you have also seen that in your classrooms. So that is one of the indicators where globally countries are struggling. And in 17% of the target, that is the red bit that is there, the progress has actually reversed. So this is basically where we stand right now, with just about, I think, around 6 years remaining. Yeah, roughly 6 years remaining. This is where we are. So this gives you an idea of how much more needs to be done. And my personal understanding, and that is something that we at CSC strongly believe, the change will only come when the kids and the future generations are roped in, because they are the ones who are affected the most. And that is basically where your role becomes sacrosanct. Basically, how you pick it, how you make them aware of it, and how you make them responsible for the actions. So that on the one hand, they are more sustainable in their livelihoods and lifestyle. They are more equitable in the way they live about. And personally speaking, I also think they should be in a position to hold us accountable for all the misdoings that we have done in the past. Like my father, what he did, what I am doing, what my generation is doing, they should be aware enough to hold us equitable and responsible and accountable as well. So this is basically where your role becomes extremely important. So moving ahead, one of the problems that we talked about was that we don't have indicators. The other problem that the world is facing right now is that there are massive data gaps. So basically, some countries are coming up with information on that indicator. Some countries are not. So if you look at it, only 68% of the indicators are again within the SDG goals. We are talking about the 190 odd indicators that are there. Out of them, in 68%, good data is not available from all countries across the world. So for some countries, usually the developed countries, the data is available because they are taking it every yearly. If you talk about India, something is basic, and this is something that I'm not very happy about. So India comes up with a data set called census. The last census came in 2011. We are in 2024, we still don't have it. And that is the most comprehensive data set that is available for India, where every household is roped in. So similar challenges are being faced by a lot of other countries across. In fact, more than half, 68%. Then there are also massive issues when it comes to gender equality. So that is one parameter countries world over, including India, they are struggling to just generate data. We are not even talking about fixing the problem. We're talking about data gaps that exist over here. We don't even know how bad the situation is. How can we possibly fix it right? We are basically working on old data, which might have changed. So we don't know what the ground reality is. Or we are even worse, working with no data. So we are going on a hunch. And when I'm talking about I'm talking about countries in total. So countries are going on their hunch to fix the problem. Then there is very limited data available on climate action as well. I remember, so India has progressed phenomenally in the past few years in terms of the indicators that they've come up with, and they have really refined it. But in the initial years, one of the parameters that India had for seeing climate action was how many LED bulbs are being sold in the country. So you can understand where we were operating. Obviously, India has improved substantially from there on. So the struggle is in how to quantify whether we are making progress or not. Then again, the third problem, and especially that's a massive problem in today's age and time. In the past 20, 30 years, if you look at it on the whole, conflicts were going down between countries. But in the past 3, 4 years, we are seeing a lot of conflicts that are coming up. And that basically comes under SDG 16. There are massive data gaps that exist over there as well. So these are the three. It doesn't mean that the other SDGs are perfectly fine, but these are the three where a lot of data gaps exist. Then what are the challenges? I'll quickly run through them. In fact, if you want, you can just go through it at leisure as well. So what I've done over here is SDG wise, I've given you the challenges that exist. So you can just go through them at your leisure as well. So you just can flip through it and you can look at it and you can actually talk about these in your classroom as well. So these are specific SDG challenges that exist. So if we talk about quality education, which is something that is close to our heart, so prolonged school closures have heightened the risk of children not returning to school. I'm confident a similar challenge also exists in college and college dropout rates and the amount of people I know. So many of my friends who are teaching in colleges right now, they talk about how first-time learners are finding it difficult. First-time learners means people who come from families where nobody has gone to colleges, how they are finding it increasingly difficult to get enrolled in colleges right now, despite having their schooling right, because of the pandemic and because of the gap that has come in between. Entrenched inequalities has worsened, and it has worsened both in terms of region. That means the large gap between the developed and the developing. And it has also widened in terms of gender between boys and girls. So that is another issue that exists. So you can see that gender again comes up over here as well in quality education. And countries are improving schools as they reopen, but psychosocial support, this is something that I was talking about. Psychosocial support is something that is currently been overlooked because we never prepared, the world never prepared for a situation like pandemic. I have a daughter who was roughly 2 or 3 years old when the pandemic happened. She, for the initial few years after the pandemic got over, struggled in meeting and socializing with people. I'm confident you will have a lot of such examples, a lot of different problems that kids are facing today because of the pandemic that happened a couple of years back. So you can go through all of these individually, and I'm confident you'll be able to understand what are the challenges that exist over there. Moving ahead, so all the 17 SDGs are stacked one after the other. The reason I'm running through this is because I want to get into the activity part because of the poll, which tells me that most of us understand what these SDGs are. So over here, I've just talked about the challenges that exist with them. So this is a concept that I don't know how many of you are dealing with in your classroom setups, but this is something that CSE is talking about very, very vehemently. And this is something that most developing countries are talking about as well. So we are talking about the politics over SDGs. So what we did last year, so if you look at these funnels that are there, each of these funnels are individual SDGs, and each of these lines are individual countries. Blue and light blue are the rich countries, and the yellow and the orange are the developing or the poor countries. So you can look at these funnel, and they will tell you the story of how much progress has happened. So if you look at it in no poverty, most of the countries have made progress, but the best are the rich countries at the top. In zero hunger, it's a mixed bag kind of a thing. In good health, again, it's the same thing. So the rich countries are performing better in all the socioeconomic parameters, which tells us that they are in a better position to talk or operate on two SDGs, which are climate action, which is at the bottom. Climate action is goal 13, where you see instead of the developed countries, it is the poor countries which are taking the lead more aggressively. So over here, you for the first time see that the yellow and the oranges are at the top, and the blue ones, people or countries that are in a better position to act because they have a good healthcare system, because they have good technology, they've got better industries, better greener technologies in place already. They are not taking the lead. And the second problem is with SDG 12, which is basically on the right-hand side in the third column. SDG 12 is about responsible consumption and production. So this is a concept which is very important to us. So we say that a part of the problem that we are facing today in terms of climate challenge is the way we are consuming things. And when I say I'm talking about, again, countries, and I'm also talking about individuals. If you look at, so if I talk about myself, so when I was in school and in college, we did not have ACs at our place. We had only one car. Today, my daughter goes to a school which has an AC. She has a school bus which has an AC. When she comes home, she switches on the AC. Our cars are always running on ACs. Our workplace is also in the same way. So we are consuming in a way that is not sustainable for the nature. And we have to bring it down. And this problem is more pronounced in the rich countries, which is the reason why they're at the bottom. So what we mean by that is an average American school going or a college going student will have a higher per capita consumption of energy than an Indian, which basically means that they'll have access to more gadgets, which is bad for the environment. They'll fly out more. They will not be using public transport. They will not be using cycles. So all of those things basically means that they are consuming much more and in a way that is not sustainable for the nature. So this is a politics that exists. And this is a politics that you should talk about in your classrooms as well. That when it comes to saving the nature, when it comes to sustaining or consuming your resources in a way that is sustainable for the long run, which is basically at the heart of the idea of SDGs. It is the developing countries or the less developed countries which are taking the lead. And it is not really that all of them are taking the lead. They don't really have an option. So if we talk about Africa, if we talk about Bangladesh, their consumption rate is much lower because they can't afford. So it is directly connected to the poverty part of it. They don't have the money to have a lot of resources as opposed to somebody in the US. So the people who have the money, who have the resources, who have the technology are not doing enough. So this is a politics that you should talk about in your classrooms as well. This is an infographic that we created at CSE, and which in a way gives you an idea of how it is. And in an ideal situation, what should have happened in is that all of these should have been rectangular. That means all countries are progressing equally. And unless and instead of that, it is basically in a funnel shaped, which basically says that some of them are making progress and many of them are being left out, which goes against the basic idea of SDGs. So now let's move on to where India stands. Uh, so this is taken from a source called SDG report, which is done by a third-party agency. They have been doing it for every year since 2016 or 17. So they basically rank all the countries according to them. So they could get data for only 167 countries. For the remaining countries, they are mostly from Africa and other places. Data is not available. So out of those 167 countries, India stands at 109, which is not a very comfortable position to be in, even though India has made good progress in the recent years. So India is at 109 out of 167. That is what the global index tells us. And if you look at the colors at at the bottom, individually SDG wise, it has shown. So if you look at red means that we need to make a lot of progress. Yellow means that we are somewhat making progress, but challenges remain. And ideally, there is a color called green, which you can't see in the India database, which shows that the SDG is being achieved. So we don't have any green over here. And the arrows basically tell us at what rate we are making improvements. So let's say if we pick up gender equity, which is SDG 5, it says that currently we have major challenges when it comes to gender equality. And how much progress are we making? The arrow shows that we are making moderately improving. So that basically means that we are somewhat making strides, but to begin with, we are really low. So it is much better than what it was earlier in the previous years, but still we are in a very crisis-driven ridden area, and we are making incremental changes slowly and steadily. But is it enough to ensure that we meet the 2030 targets under it? It says it isn't. It should have been green again, which is the case when it comes to no poverty. So India came up with a multi-dimensional poverty concept, and in which they have been able to show that a lot of the people within India are now multidimensionally not poor, or they've been brought out of poverty, which basically looks at other things like education, healthcare. So can we afford healthcare? Can we afford food and all of those things? So India has made good progress, and green shows that we will reach there by 2030 going at the current progress. So the only other SDG where we are making such progress is education, according to this database. In all the others, we are not making progress. And in fact, in SDG 11, which talks about sustainable cities and communities, we are actually reversing our progress. That is because the arrow shows down. That is the reason why it shows downwards. We are reversing the progress that we have made in the recent years. And one of the major reasons for it is the rising incidence of extreme weather events, which is basically destroying our cities. We saw that in Wayanad, we saw that in Assam. We are recently seeing it in a lot of cities in Gujarat because of the heavy rainfalls that have happened over there. So whatever we have built is being brought down to rubble. So it's like we are starting again from zero over there. So this is where India stands right now. And this is a state-wise analysis or situation of India right now. So Uttarakhand is right now. So this is taken from, so Niti Aayog comes up with the SDG report. So it came up with one, I think a month or 2 months back. So this is based on that. It says that Uttarakhand, Kerala, these are the states that are doing reasonably well. And the northeastern states, and then there is Jharkhand and Bihar at the bottom, which are doing, which need to pull up to be able to make progress. So, and this is important because again, if you remember, SDG talks about not leaving anybody behind, both in terms of country level and also within India, it talks about it in terms of the state levels and the UT levels. If you see, the union territories are making much better progress, but as an expert or somebody who has been looking at SDGs for a very long time, my fear is that if you look at the difference in the numbers between the best performing states and the least performing states, the range is not much. It basically means that if there is a major crisis, let's say if any of these states face a massive extreme weather event, or there is, for some reason, there are other problems that come up, then this might actually get reversed. So we are not making a lot of progress. Even the best one is not really making that much progress. So that is something that you have to be careful when you're looking at it. We've gone through that. So any questions that you guys have right now about the the first part of the training, which where we are basically looking at where India stands, where the world stands, and what are the SDGs as an idea. Then you can just type it out. If you can type it out, we'll just wait for a minute over here. Any questions about this? Then we'll move on to how we can take it into our classrooms. Yep. How are these targets arrived at? So it is a very, so UN basically comes up with these targets. However, the problem is countries also have their own targets. So a lot of the targets that India follows within the SDGs might not feature in the UN. So basically the targets are the way to measure whether progress is happening or not. So India has its own set of targets. There are also some targets that India wants to measure, but doesn't have the data set right now. So that is also there in India as well. So these targets are sort of fluidic, but broadly they talk about the same thing. So it's like if I want to understand the progress made in gender equality or health in for that matter, we can look at MMR, which is maternal mortality, which is obviously there in most of the cases. Some places also look at IMR along with it, which is infant mortality rate. So these keep on changing. So at the global level, UN comes up with it, where basically they have a consultation and they have a group. But at the national levels, some of them will overlap, but a few might not also overlap. So that is basically what it is. Uh, there's a question called by Indrajit. You said a lot of things are getting destroyed. Do you think it is because not doing fairly well in SDGs? Yep, in a way
Yeah.
that is also true. And that is basically at the heart of the problem. We are taking too much from the nature, and nature in a way is fighting back through the extreme weather events. So that is something that we think. Along with that, it is so the beauty of SDGs, and that is, I think, the dichotomy of our life as well. Not one thing triggers the crisis that we face in our lives. So it is basically a mixed bag of a lot of things. So one is obviously the way we are consuming. The second is also the way we are developing, in the sense the way we are building our cities, which is very unsustainable. Something as basic as, and this is something that has always made me a little angry in a way. So you see most of the new airports or most of the new buildings that are coming up in the cities of India, they have these glass facade. They look pretty. They make sense, that sense. But in a country which has that much of sun rays coming into, it doesn't really make sense. It's like you're increasing the amount of heat these buildings will take in. And then you are investing a lot of money to improve the efficiency when it comes to air conditioning. So basically, you got a faulty design that you're stuck with, and then you are improving on it by coming up with efficient ways of making air conditioning. So that is basically how we are also making it. Then the other is how we have treated our forests, how we have treated our marine, how we have treated everything around it. And that basically is a problem for India. Another problem that we face, and that is true for many other developing countries, is that we have got a substantial amount of poor people. So we need, so they would they would use fossil fuel, not really fossil fuel, but they'll use wood as the primary source of fuel. So that leads to a lot of health problems. That is also bad for the environment, but they can't afford anything beyond that. So it is basically a juxtaposition of all the SDGs that we are doing wrong right now, and a lot of things that we have done wrong historically for the past 100, years. And I would again jump back to the point that I tried to make earlier. Where the world is right now is not basically because of what we did in the past 15, 20 years. It is because of the way the world developed in the past 150 years. So it is basically the onus, and this is where the politics comes handy. And I'm confident, I remember Trishant had also talked about it in the first live session of the series. The developed countries have to take the responsibility for their historical wrongdoings. And they have to take the onus, in the sense they have to give out more money for the transition, so that the developing countries don't go through the same trajectory of poor or dirty fuel, and then they slowly move to the green fuel. So they have to give the money, and they also have to partake or share their technology, which is where a lot of confusion and problems exist even now. Any other question? The small organization can measure these. No. When all countries do equally well performing SDG, just left 6 years, could there be a real reason in the world? So my understanding is that we will definitely make progress as a world as a whole. But the honest answer is that it might not be as much as it could have been. It's exactly like there are kids in the classroom who have a lot of potential, but they did not study enough, so they did not get the marks. So the world is also progressing towards that. So we could have done much better at SDGs and could have actually made a just, equitable, and sustainable world. But we will be somewhere close to that at the end of 2030. But this is a very personal understanding of things. And some of the countries would do exceptionally well, like we see the European countries, the Nordic countries, they are doing exceptionally well. But some of the countries like Africa, specifically the island nations that are there, they are struggling and they might lag. So maybe later on we'll also pull them up as well. But 2030 might not be a realistic target for this, so they might extend it beyond that as well. I'll move on. How much time am I left with? 10 minutes? 10 minutes, perfect. So I'll just pause over here and I'll just move on. If there are any questions, we can talk about it later on as well. So now let's talk about the activity. This is one of the activities that we've already gone through. The second activity is, so India, what it has done is that it is measuring its SDG progress in bulk of the places through the government schemes that it has brought out with. So if you can look at the flagship government schemes, you can also see whether they are making progress in SDGs and all. So what I've done on the right is, so for no poverty, I'll just quickly go through. There is a scheme called Mahatma Gandhi Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, which basically promises 100 days of employment for rural Indians if they demand for work. So that basically means if I live in a village and I don't have any other work, then I can ask my panchayat, give me work. And for 100 days, they're duty bound to give me work. So MGNREGS is a very wonderful way of ascertaining. So the rate or the money that they give is not a lot. So ideally, if the villages are prospering, people would not avail work under MGNREGS. But whenever there is a crisis, like during the pandemic, we saw there was a spike because there were no jobs there. So this is a very nice safety net that exists. So this is one scheme. So the progress of this scheme is one way of looking at it. So this is how also the government looks at it. Deen Dayal Antyodaya or this is the National Rural Livelihood Mission is another. National Urban Livelihood Mission is another. Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana. So you can also talk about these schemes within your classrooms when you're talking about SDGs, and you can look at which are the schemes India is making progress in. So this is a list of this, PM Awas Yojana and all. And these are the flagship schemes that exist. Similarly, we have it for all the SDGs that exist. So you can go through them at your leisure, and you can also discuss them as well. So that will give you an idea of, so if I, in my head, this makes sense. So I have done political science in my graduation. So if I am a political science lecturer or a teacher, I would by default have to talk about the progress that Indian government is making. So I will be talking about these schemes. A subset of that could also be how it is impacting the SDGs. So it's basically connecting all the dots over there. So this is another activity that we can look at. Then we can move on to the third activity that I have looked at. And this is a very interesting activity. This is a global activity. So UN is running this, and it has been running it for the past few years. It's called Become a Factivist. They basically say that they use an SDG fact and create a data card around it. So the three fact sheets or visualizations that you see on the right, these have been created by kids. I don't remember exactly which one is which, but I know one of them has been made by a girl who's 7 years old and is in Britain. The other is a college student in Canada. And the third one, I don't really remember. So in your classrooms, you can ask your kids to take any fact. So you can talk about what SDGs are, and they can pick up any fact from the SDGs. Let's say I am very, very worried about poverty. So I can pick up a data point from there. I can create this. And if you see at the bottom, there is a link that is available. You can upload these on the website, and it will be available for the outside world to take a look at. So basically, you're giving your students an opportunity to showcase their work to the world in a way, because this is a UN website that is there. So Within this, within the Factivist, they also have. So if you look at Plan for Teachers, this is a Google link. There's a link that is there. So they have given small activities that you can do. So you can also go through it and you can find different ways of going about, and you can tweak it according to what works best for the kind of student that you're dealing with. Then inspire sustainable attitudes is another idea. So you can look at lifestyles. This is something that we have done with a lot of kids from college and from school, and this works wonders. So you can talk to them about how historically things have changed. So when we were young, we would always, I still remember, we would get those small coins at Mother Dairy. So I am an urban child. So we would carry our milk box or whatever you call it, a container, and we would buy those coins and then we would take out. Right now, it is all plastic. So the transition that has happened, and there are many examples that you would be able to come up with. So you can discuss these as well, how our lifestyles have become unsustainable over the years. Something as basic as, I remember the first time I got my mobile phone, and I remember how many years I used it, as opposed to how frequently we change our mobile phones right now. And that's e-waste that we are generating. So we can talk about these. We can create energy sleuths. Basically, we can also ask in groups, students, how to look at renewable and non-renewable sources. What are the different energy sources for anything that they're doing? Waste watchers is another idea that you can go through. And in waste watchers, what I've done is basically in groups, they can look at what kind of waste has been generated in colleges, in the campuses, in their households. And they can also, this carbon calculator, which basically stands out, you can click on it. This gives you a calculator to calculate what is the environmental cost of it. So there are multiple calculators as basic as if I'm generating 100 units of waste every month, the carbon footprint is equivalent to my drive from Delhi to Agra and back. So that is how much we are harming, because we normally we only think of dirty cars and dirty industries when we think of climate change. We don't think of anything else. That waste also has a role. Plastics also have a role. The use of internet also has a role. So you can basically bring about that conversation in your classroom through this. Then you can track the energy history. Basically, everything that you have. I have done it with school students where I've picked up a pencil and I've asked them, what is the energy cost of this? So students initially think, what is the energy cost of a pencil? It's so nice. We use it every day. So you've got paper, you've got wood that is being chopped. You've got lead that has been mined. You've got these things happening in different parts of the country, and they are being transported to a factory somewhere in the outskirts of Delhi. So there is an environmental cost of the transportation. So you can talk about these everyday things, and you can talk about the energy history of all of these things. And that can be a very good entry point to have a conversation around SDGs after that. And last is, you can also look at packaging. Everything around us is packaged today. And there are good packages and bad packages. Good packages are what we would traditionally use, and bad packages and really bad packages are the multi-layered plastics that we use, in which we get our kurkure packets. I love kurkure, but I hate the packaging it comes in, because it is practically impossible to biodegrade it. It just does not, it is just not good for the environment. So you can talk about how different packaging, how things come in different packaging. You can also talk about how after India introduced a ban on plastics a couple of years back, Amazon now sends it in paper packaging or in cardboards, which are much more environment friendly than plastic. So you can talk about these things as well with them. This is where I stop and I pause. If you have any questions, queries, you can just type it out or you can unmute, and I'll ask Sakshi to come over as well.
Thanks a lot for the wonderful presentation, Rajat. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat box. You can also unmute yourself and ask your questions if you want.
There is a question called how to improve climate resilience. Hmm. So when we talk about climate change, we talk about two things. One is the adaptation part of it, where we are basically where resilience comes in. So we need to build our cities in a better way. At an individual level, we have to ensure that our waste generation is gone goes down substantially. Something as basic as we should look at waste segregation. The organic waste can always be composted and used locally. In my residential apartment where I stay, we have started doing that. So all the organic waste is basically taken care locally. I'm confident a lot of campuses are also doing it. So what you're left with, really bad or like medical waste that you come up with, or sanitary waste that you come up with, that you can send it back to the waste picker. Rest everything can be recycled within. So everything that we were, so because we are all working right now, everything that we learned from our fathers and our grandfathers and our grandmothers, those are the ways that we should try to inculcate, so that improves our resilience. The other part of the question is also that we need to have economic independence. That also gives us a lot of resilience to be able to adapt to climate change. Uh, I'm sorry, what is CDM? I'm not aware, Indrajit. If you could just tell me, I
So
might
this is
be
clean
lost.
development mechanism. Sorry, I'm so sorry. This is clean development mechanism.
Clean
The
development
carbon,
mechanism. Uh,
the carbon trading thing that we are
uh,
banking on right now.
It's a
like
carbon offset scheme. I am not
Keto
the right
protocol है
person
sir.
to comment on this, but right now most of these carbon trading mechanisms are not really doing very well. So I think you should email to either Tushita or to Sakshi, and they will help you get in touch with Prashant. So they look
Thank you
at
so much. Thank you.
carbon trade, but broadly they are not doing exceptionally well.
Exactly.
Yep. Any other question that is there?
One.
How to announce the importance of environmental education and make major subject in school level? Okay, how do we enhance the? I think the new education policy has brought a lot of focus onto environmental education. So I am now talking from my personal experience. So I have a 7-year-old daughter. She understands extreme weather event. In fact, 2 days back we had a session on extreme weather events for school children. There were 200 kids, and they knew what floods are because it is impacting them. My daughter, the first time I spoke to her about extreme weather events, she said that, "Oh, मेरी छुट्टियां हो रही है school में because of too much rain." So they are getting affected. So those days we are not able to. So I think in general they are much more aware. The role of educators, the role of teachers becomes very important, because you can link climate with everything that you're teaching, or almost everything that you're teaching in the classroom. So if you can keep an undertone of climate in everything that you're teaching in the classroom, that would bring about more awareness. I personally think that that is a way forward. Any other question that I've missed out, or anybody else wants to unmute or ask? Or Sakshi, you can take it.
Yeah, if you have any other questions, you can unmute and ask. Put them in the chat box. Whatever you want.
Hi, Rajit.
Hi.
Can you hear me? Hi, Rajit and Shakib. First of all, brilliant session.
Thanks a lot.
And actually, I'm an informal educator. So
Okay.
wherein I go to schools, I go to colleges, I also meet the communities.
Okay.
Okay, and I teach on climate change and environment, ecology, and all those things. So, how do I take it further? Shall I go with the same materials? And today's class was brilliant because I've never touched upon the SDGs as you did it. But
Thank you.
I'm really impressed.
So my personal experience, again, I am somewhat like you. I'm confident you are much more elaborate and extensive in terms of the outreach, but because of my work, I get to meet a lot of college students and school students. So what I've seen is telling stories around it, and you'll find a lot of stories when you're dealing with climate change. Like my favorite story of an elephant which started eating rice in Kerala because they could not find enough food. In Arikomban is the name. It was in news. So if you can, for kids, if you can tell them in a story format, that usually works. And there are so many stories around us, like things that we take for granted, like ice creams being eaten by monkeys.
Correct. Yeah.
So if you can actually give an animal or a human face to it. So when I told my 7-year-old daughter about Arikomban and how he loves rice because he could not find food in the forest, which is an oversimplification of what has happened. But the first question she asked was, what happened to the forests?
Uh-huh.
And from there on, you can actually build up and you can get into deeper problems as well.
Yeah, brilliant. Anyhow, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Do we have any other questions? Maybe we can take one
Uh,
last.
Okay, good evening, ma'am. Good evening, sir. I'm Obunti Chatterjee from Kolkata. I have already put my question in the chat box regarding the indicators.
What
So,
is, can
can
you
you
just repeat it? Because it's difficult
yes,
for me to
like
hold up.
actually, yes, like how do we know about the indicators? Like just now you told about the LED bulbs, you know, how much LED bulbs are being sold. So that is one of the indicators.
Okay.
So like, suppose I'm talking about climate action, you know, I mean, any of the SDGs. So how do we as school educators like tell the children that, okay, these are the indicators, you know, like, so accordingly we can work on it, you know, something like just making them aware.
So there are
So
two
like,
Yeah, I'm sorry to butt in. I'm sorry. There
no,
are two
that's
things
fine,
that I
sir.
personally do. One is that Niti Aayog is the nodal agency for SDGs in India. So Niti Aayog
Mm-hmm.
comes with a report. This year, 2 months back, they came up with it. So inside that report, you will find all the indicators that India is looking at. Similarly, so the first few slides that I had, in that I had an SDG report. So that name is there, the exact report name. That is something that comes annually. So over there, you will find the indicators that are looked at globally. But my
Okay.
personal request would be, and also you can also look at the data, factist that activity that I have over there. I have a link to for teachers to plan their sessions. Over there, it's basically a doc file, Google Doc file. Over there, UN has come up with these important indicators within the SDGs. However, personally speaking, I have seen getting into the indicators, it's basically you become so granular that it takes away from the bigger message. And when you're dealing with, so if you're dealing with policymakers or subject matter experts, it makes sense to go into the granularity of it all. But when you teach kids, it makes sense to keep it as broad as possible so that people can talk and think about it. The underlying problem is that they should think in a climate way, or they should think in an equity way when they're meeting their friends, they're talking to others. Like 2 days back, one of the students, she was, I think, 5 or 6 years old. She unmuted and she said that I've been telling my dad for so many years that we should put our AC on eco mode when we're using it. Now I have the answer. So,
Okay.
so such things are much more tangible to talk about, to initiate the
Right.
conversation. Thanks.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much, sir. Okay.
Right. I think that was the last question for the day. Thank you so much, Rajit. And we've already put the link for the attendance and feedback form in the chat box. Please refer to that. And with that, we would like to close the session and the series. I hope the session was fruitful for you. Yeah, ma'am, Shrilakshmi ma'am, we will be sharing the PPT and the session recording with you by tomorrow or by Monday. Right. So that's it with the series and with the session. Thank you so much for participating. Thank you, Rajit.
Thank you.
And just a reminder, please do fill the form before you leave the meeting. And we'll see you next month with yet another session. If you've not yet registered for the Gen Network, please do that before you leave. And we hope to see you in the next session soon. Thank you. We'll keep the meeting on for a while so that you can fill out your forms. And if you have any other thing to add on, you can put it in the chat box. Thank you. Bye-bye. See you.
Bye-bye.